Well, he did it again. Ilia Topuria has knocked out yet another one of our favorites as he absolutely flatlined Charles Oliveira in brutal fashion last night at UFC 317. In this video, we are going to recap and react to UFC 317, which saw Ilia Topuria and new Alexandre Pantoja and the fight of the year to this point in Josh Van versus Brandon Royval. So stick around to hear my thoughts. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. We will start with the main event of Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira. Like I said last week, the biggest possible matchup in the UFC, given that we did not get Jones Aspinall and Islam Makhachev left the division, so we did not get Makhachev versus Topuria. Topuria was a heavy favorite going into this fight, and I picked this fight. I actually predicted it very, very well. Now, as great of a moment as that was for this year and for MMA, it's tough to see Charles Oliveira go out like this. Many people noted Ilia Topuria being a shorter featherweight, and so this move up to 155 pounds very well could have put him at a massive disadvantage in size. The size difference wasn't that pronounced once they actually got into the cage, especially given that Oliveira is on the taller side for lightweight, so he just has a little bit more frail frame, I guess, compared to Ilia Topuria. And you saw that in the beginning of the fight where Topuria was able to break out of clinch positions and grappling positions really easily, despite being the smaller fighter and coming up from the lower weight class. Oliveira attempted to pull guard and throw up submissions from his back, which Topuria showed yet again that he's not just a knockout artist, that he very much has his wits about him on the ground, even with somebody like Charles Oliveira, who has the most submissions in UFC history. Now, Ilia Topuria is absolutely the biggest star that we have in MMA. John Jones is retired. Conor McGregor is everything but retired. And the UFC is going to go all in on the Ilia Topuria train. They're going to do an event in Spain for sure, basically KOing 3 out of the best 10 fighters that we've had in the last decade, KOing the 2 best featherweights of all time, and now a surefire UFC Hall of Famer in Charles Oliveira, former champion, most finishes, most submissions in UFC history. A lot of us expected Charles to go out the way he did, given that he gets hurt in just about every fight. But I don't think many of us saw him getting flatline KO'd that early into the fight. And really, besides a couple good grappling exchanges, didn't really have shit for Ilia Topuria. Now, what does this KO mean for Ilia Topuria? Pretty obviously, he's the biggest star in the sport, and it's nothing but big matchups from here on. Even if it's Arman Tsarukyan, who's the least popular of the 3 potential opponents for him next, they're all massive fights. They called Paddy Pimblett into the cage after the fight, and while Dana White was not happy about the production team letting that happen, that's still the most fun fight for all of us. Arman Tsarukyan, not a super compelling matchup. He's very similar to Charles Oliveira in some ways, high level grappling with some dynamic striking, but not many fans really give a rat's ass about Arman Tsarukyan. Justin Gaethje kind of turned off the fans when he said, I want a title shot or I'm retiring. So Paddy Pimblett, basically them having some heat on that matchup and them having the face-off, I think you have to do that. Even with Paddy being ranked 8th and this probably being a rushed title shot. I mean, Michael Chandler's not crazy of a win these days, considering that he's 2-7 in the UFC. But if you're looking to make a massive fight, especially with the UFC streaming deal coming up at the end of this year, and they're looking to go to a major platform like Netflix or network TV, putting together a massive international, a massive super fight between international guys like Topuria and Paddy Pimblett would bode really well for their broadcasting deal, because it is a North American company. And if they can have a North American company basically being carried by overseas stars, it bodes well for these streaming platforms wanting to have a global audience, because the UFC does have a very segmented distribution package where you have UFCs on like 90 different channels worldwide. And if it was just on Netflix, somebody like Netflix that wants to grow their subscriber base could do so with Paddy Pimblett, Ilia Topuria fight, in January or February, something like that. The fight itself, pretty short and sweet, but there's a lot leading up to it, such as Islam Makhachev moving up to 170 pounds, which is who all of us want to see now against Ilia Topuria. But given that he's moving up to fight at 170, it doesn't make sense to have Ilia move up another weight class, which would be 25 pounds up from where he was originally, to make that fight. If anything, Makhachev versus Topuria likely only happens if Makhachev loses to Jack Della Maddalena later this year and comes back down. Pimblett versus Topuria is the biggest name matchup that they can make, especially going into a rights package negotiation. Now, Topuria is like essentially unbeatable, it seems, at this point. He's KO'd some of the best strikers in UFC history in Max Holloway and Volkanovski, and then defended the grappling very, very, very well against Oliveira and then KO'd him. So there really isn't any holes in his game that have been exploited to this point. Now, I know some fans go back to the Ryan Hall fight that he had some trouble with, the Bryce Mitchell fight where he had a little bit of trouble dealing with Bryce Mitchell on the feet, and the Youssef Zalal fight where he kind of survived his way to a decision win. But most fighters, once they become champ, get a lot better from a confidence standpoint, from the access to training partners and treatment that they get having that type of money and status. Somebody like Ilia Topuria has gotten 10 or 20% better just as champion. Now, huge fight. We've seen it all over social media, so there's not a whole lot much else to say about it. It was a 2.5-minute fight with a highlight reel KO, and Ilia's the biggest star in the sport. That's kind of the gist of it. Now, moving on to the co-main event, Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France. I had a feeling going into this fight that it was going to be a really dominant performance from Pantoja, given that they had fought on The Ultimate Fighter like 10 years ago, and it went about the same way. Kai Kara-France is an elite fighter for this weight class. But the fact of the matter is he's 24-12 in his career now. And if he was in any other division in the UFC besides flyweight or heavyweight that are very, very shallow divisions, he would just be like a middle of the pack guy. But given that he's at flyweight, he's got a title shot last night that he lost, an interim title shot that he got against Brandon Moreno back in like 2022 or 3 that he lost. It's one of those things where you have a shitty division, so you have undeserved title shots. Like Brandon Moreno is 1 win from a 4th and 5th title shot over and over again because of the division. And so somebody like Alexandre Pantoja, who's literally a top 15 fighter of all time at this point, getting matched up with middle of the pack UFC talent that just happens to be in his weak division. There's really nobody besides maybe Josh Van at this point that's a compelling matchup for Pantoja, because Pantoja's beaten the entire top 10 now, minus Joshua Van. And he's beaten some of them multiple times. He beat Moreno 3 times, Royval twice, Kai Kara-France twice. There really isn't much to say about the co-main event other than that Pantoja is super well-rounded and Kai Kara-France got exposed. He trains at a kickboxing gym and he got submitted and he had his back taken for like 10 minutes of a 14-minute fight. I don't really know what else to say about Kai Kara-France. He's mid. And he just trains with big name people like Volk and Adesanya, so he ends up in these positions. But this was not a deserved fight by any means. So there's really not much to say. I mean, total strikes were fairly similar, but control time, takedowns, submission attempts, Kai Kara-France built this up a lot just to come out flat and get submitted. Now, the fight that really matters in regards to this co-main event is the feature fight on the main card, which was Joshua Van and Brandon Royval. Now, this is a top 3 UFC fight that I've ever seen, and it was definitely fight of the year to this point. Brandon Royval, I thought he was going to cause a lot of problems for Josh Van, being significantly longer and more experienced, and having not just fought and did a weight cut 3 weeks ago at 316. But Josh Van's 23 years old and could become the 2nd youngest champ in UFC history behind John Jones, after a super impressive performance. I mean, you have a total of 400 strikes landed between the two, and Joshua Van landing basically 2/3 of 311 strikes is insane. This division's kind of been on the ropes since Demetrius Johnson had 12 straight title defenses, and Brandon Moreno brought it back for a very short amount of time. But the way that the flyweight division goes is we have a flash in the pan of 1 or 2 very big title fights that get the fans' attention, and then it goes back to a co-main event slot like it was last night, because like I just said a minute ago, you have Pantoja, dominant champion, going up against undeserved title shots in Brandon Royval twice now, Kai Kara-France. It's a co-main event type of division, kind of like the women's divisions most of the time. Josh Van turned himself into a budding superstar last night, given that performance, and given that his fight style is very casual, fan-friendly. We've talked about on the channel before how 75% of the money that gets made in this sport is not from hardcores that watch every card, that watch the Apex events. It's from the people that buy $2,000 tickets, because the hardcore fans like you and me are not spending $2,000 on a ticket to go watch these fights in person. we're watching them at home, usually on a stream, to be honest. But the main point is that that fan base is not super educated on grappling, clinch work, and all of that. But everybody from new UFC fan to long time been watching the sport since the 90s can be entertained by essentially a boxing match with 4-ounce gloves. And that's Josh Van's fighting style. It's literally just spamming 1-2-3s over and over again in the pocket. And I'm not trying to discredit that. It's entertaining. You know, say that it's a very fan-friendly fight style that could make him a huge star. It's the same as when Conor McGregor blew up. People understand knockouts, stand-up game. The same way Ilia Topuria is becoming the biggest name in the sport off of knockouts in the first round. It's a kind of a simple way to explain becoming a big fighter in the UFC, but first-round knockouts and quick knockouts, especially with the hands, kind of appeal to fans of all interest levels. So Josh Van was probably going to win the fight anyway, but he sealed the fight with a knockdown with about 5 seconds left. Had a face-off in the cage with Pantoja after the fight, so that's basically confirmed to be the next title fight at 125 pounds. Moving on from there, the only lackluster fight on the main card was Beneil Dariush and Money Moicano, and that was the only pick that I got wrong on this card, or on this main card, was Moicano, because coming off of a loss, even though it was a quick loss on 1 day's notice, to Islam Makhachev in January, you'd think that Moicano would have grown quite a bit, knowing that he was just in there with the best fighter in the world, even if it was a one-sided fight. Islam Makhachev all the way down to Beneil Dariush is a massive step down. So I was expecting like a 30-27 decision, a late round submission for Moicano. But as you can see right here, he got outstruck 77-38. He got taken down 5 times. And this is something that you see with someone like Renato Moicano, given that they are such a high-level jiu-jitsu black belt. They get taken down and they accept that bottom position and start trying to throw up triangles, arm bars. And in MMA, if you're on bottom, 99.9% of the time, you're losing in the judge's eyes. Moicano, already being down in the fight, is essentially accepting guard position in the 3rd round against another high-level grappler that's not going to just like give an arm for an armbar or something like that. It was low fight IQ. I was honestly semi-disappointed in the fight IQ of Renato Moicano because he's a fighter that I really like, and he's really experienced. He's 36 years old. He's been in the UFC for over 10 years. It was really low-level fight IQ from a high-level fighter that's been literally in a championship fight less than 6 months ago. So Beneil Dariush takes home the unanimous decision, 29-28, 30-27 on one of the cards. And kind of a bummer for the UFC because Moicano's the guy that they want to push. He's the fan favorite. And now you have the soft-spoken, kind of on his way out of the sport, Beneil Dariush, knocking off the guy that they want to build up. So a little bit lackluster, but Dariush might get like a Gamrot or a Sarukian, probably not Sarukian, a Gamrot, or probably having to fight another up-and-comer, because the UFC doesn't really fuck with him like that. Now, moving on to the opening fight of the main card, Frank Ocean's boyfriend actually looked pretty good for once. He got dominated by a 40-year-old man in January, like not even close. They built him up to be a Conor McGregor type of prospect, and he went out there and got totally dominated by 40-year-old Hayani Barcelos, who in hindsight has actually looked pretty good, so it's not that bad of a loss. But he dominated this one, got taken down 3 times, found his way back to the feet, tripled up Felipe Lima on his strikes, which is impressive. The only negative thing I have to say about this fight is the UFC booking 2 super high-level prospects on like 2 weeks' notice. Like, these guys are both in their early 20s, early to mid-20s. It was like 9-1 versus 15-1. And the UFC matches them up on 2 weeks' notice. Like, I'm absolutely for prospects fighting prospects. It's not a bad thing to me, especially because boxing finds a way to like ruin the sport where you keep all the good fighters away from each other until they're all like undefeated 30-0, and then you just do one big fight. And then, I mean, you guys know how boxing goes. Once a guy loses like one fight, they talk about retirement. So I'm super for the UFC matching prospects up, but on 2 weeks' notice, just for the sake of filling a slot on a pay-per-view main card because Paulo Costa had to get bumped back to the next pay-per-view. Kind of a dumb decision. That's the UFC matchmaking in 2025, though. It kind of doesn't make sense to the people that understand how they used to do things. Like, they used to give people like Conor McGregor favorable matchups where it's not an easy fight, but the stylistic matchup makes a level of sense to where he can win. They didn't just throw Conor McGregor in there with a Chad Mendes like high-level wrestler until he was in a title fight. If they would have done that in his first fight, in the UFC, it might not have gone so well, but they gave him other strikers early on, and that allowed him to build up star power, highlight reel, have a bunch of memorable moments on the mic. Whereas Payton Talbott, Felipe Lima, even Ilia Topuria, when they first brought him in, he was fighting killers within like 2 fights. And for him, you know, he's probably going to end up being the best fighter of all time. So it ended up working out and he's undefeated, but not everybody's Topuria, especially these Payton Talbott, Felipe Lima types that have huge gaps in their skill set and in their fight IQ. So I know I'm shitting on this fight a little bit, but it's mostly just the matchmaking. The fight itself was fine. It just feels that the UFC is kind of working against themselves in this prospect matchmaking at times, but probably going to get a ranked opponent next, like a fringe ranking guy, because they want to push him. He's unranked with like 10 fights and they already have him like doing promo with Tony Hawk and all that type of stuff. So he's going to be pushed into a ranked fight yet again, even if he's not ready for it. That's the main card. Basically, aside from that, you had a nasty KO from Jack Hermansson, nasty KO from Gregory Rodriguez on Jack Hermansson, which was semi-controversial because Herb Dean got in there super, super late to stop the fight. And Hermansson took like a few super unnecessary shots, but it is what it is. The ref can't always get there in time. And I saw a lot of people on Instagram talking about how Gregory Rodriguez is a dirty fighter because he had follow-up shots. They're fighting for half their check. If he loses, he's getting half the money. Like if I was in that situation, I'd be making extra sure. So that's the main card, plus a little bit of a prelim recap. And so we had the biggest fight of the year to this point, ended with our new champion, Ilia Topuria. The rest of the card was really good. The card quality going in was really lacking, but for the most part, the fights delivered. We have a new #1 contender, a new name at 125. Pantoja is probably a top 15 guy of all time, and now we have the biggest star in the sport, Ilia Topuria. So that's my thoughts on UFC 317. Let me know your thoughts down below. Did you like this video? Then like and subscribe down below. I also do multiple live streams per week, along with behind the scenes content and members only live streams for our channel members. So become a channel member for access to bonus content. It's only $5 per month and it greatly helps the channel's growth. I also do a podcast with my best friend Bo, and I have a non-MMA channel as well called Wyatt's World. You can check both of those out linked below.